1 week season.
Hello, 1 week season fam. This is Mr. P. Rich, Matty P. Rich, coming to you here with a bias check update for week 7. We have got as always, very interesting slate on our hands here. It's 10 games again, and I am not in my usual spot. I, this week, am directing a retreat, a Kairos retreat, and so we are on a break right now, and I'm taking my opportunity to record this bias check. So let's dive right into this week 7 by, again, looking back at week 6, trying to see what biases we recognized and how we were able to use them as an actionable piece in our lineup building. Last week, the team jammed them in. At least the idea of it became very popular sort of early on in the week. So we talked about, with all of the chalk hitting, is it a good decision to play, I think it was Puka Nacua, Jonathan Taylor, and CMC together, right? To try to spend down in your other positions and spend up and just jam them in and guarantee yourself enough of a floor. One of the things we said about this was that while it seems very probable that these chalky plays would hit because they have been hitting, that getting a ceiling outcome out of all three would be somewhat like the top 3 most favored teams on the week losing, which had happened the week before. And so, of course, Puka Nacua got hurt. That can always happen. And some of the other plays performed, but not quite up to expectations. And so team jammed them in, although it seemed like an easy way to provide certain points for your lineup. Really was not the way to go. That was not the way to win tournaments last week. And really, that's what we are all about. We want to be first place because all of the money is in first place. So again, let's try to inquire a little bit more when we think that the decision is so easy. No decision in DFS should be easy. We talked about Stephon Diggs, and he had just broken out for a big week against his old team, Buffalo, and a lot of people were going to be playing him. He was pretty popular. He did disappoint, right? We had talked about Drake May often, if he is hitting or if his team is hitting, he's only bringing one person with him. Sometimes that's a tight end. Sometimes it's a running back. In this case, it was a different wide receiver. And I think we need to plan on this going forward. We'll talk a little bit about Drake May in the context of this week, as they are in another spot where people will want to play them. We had talked about the Arizona sort of negativity bias surrounding Arizona, and that we needed to be cautious. Was this negativity bias something that we should dismiss, right? Because it was about the coach, and sometimes you want to make sure that your coach has a good handle on the team if you are going to roster those guys, if you're going to invest in them. And so I had sort of put it out there that I'm not really sure how to handle this. I do know there's negativity bias. I feel like people will shy away from the spot as a whole. Trey McBride ended up being the highest owned tight end on the slate. He ended up producing. So people were not scared off, at least of that play. In fact, I think they were probably more scared off of, they were more intrigued after the quarterback, Kyler Murray, was out, and they were able to sort of trust Jacoby Brissett and his connection with Trey McBride a little better. We may get that same situation again this week. Trey McBride will again be a popular piece for people that can fit him in. Talk a little bit about salaries as well going forward. We had said yes on Lad McConkey, that although his season had started off slow, that we had a different opinion on him after drafting him in the first and second rounds of season-long fantasy drafts, we had said, yeah, Lad McConkey has the skills to be able to hit on any given week. He did that last week. It took a play in the fourth quarter to get him there, but that is Lad McConkey. That's his sort of game-breaking abilities to break off a couple big plays, right? To score a couple touchdowns. And we do not want to dismiss players like that. He is not an every week player. He does not get that kind of a volume. But even on low volume, sometimes Lad McConkey can hit. We had talked about the new quarterback in Cincinnati and whether and what we would do with sort of this novelty bias, this new piece on a team that we were excited about. And my thinking was that we should focus on Jamar Chase, right? And whether Jamar Chase was still viable. We said, well, anytime he scores 2 touchdowns, he puts up a score that you really need to have. Can he do that with a pocket passer? Of course he can, right? And he had a nice game. Again, he has had a lot of volume. We should expect him to continue to see volume and continue to threaten to put up a couple touchdowns. Last week, Joe Flacco was priced at the min salary. Well, that's not the case going forward. I hope if you played Jamar Chase last week, you played him with Flacco. But going forward, I would only focus on Jamar Chase. Again, we have tonight, Jamar Chase is playing in the Thursday night game. I don't need to pair those two together. I can play Jamar Chase on his own, and I still feel like he can put up a score you need to have. You cannot win without. We talked about Jackson Smith and Jigba and saying, if you want to play him, right, his real ceiling comes in games that are closely contested, where the Seahawks need to increase their pass rate. And that happened. You probably would have been happy playing him with Brian Thomas Jr. If Brian Thomas Jr. had hit on I think he had one big play, right, that was called back on a ticky-tack penalty, a false start. That would have been a great stack. I think you should always consider playing a bring back when you play JSN. It's not, should I play JSN? It's who should I play when playing JSN? All right, so that takes us through last week. Again, those are pieces we can look at moving forward. Seahawks are not on the main slate. Cincinnati's not on the main slate. But again, we'll kind of look for some ways that we can respond to the biases this week and make good lineup decisions. All right, sort of a piece of investigation this week. I always like to in the middle here of these podcasts, investigate more deeply one aspect of DFS or one aspect of the year so far. So I've been talking about this since week 3, where I've been trying to track the data, that running back chalk is usually a good chalk to roster. What does that mean? Well, if I look at the top 10 highest owned plays every week since week 3, right? Week 3, 4, 5, and 6, we find that most of the scores that you wanted to have, and in fact, nearly all of the scores that you needed to have at the running back position were from the top 10 to 12 highest owned players. So I made a table just to kind of chart this, and I don't want to sort of confuse you with the table, but looking at it, there is an idea that in general, right, the general consensus of the DFS industry is getting the running back position right. Can that carry forward? All right, first I want to look at some of the people that the fantasy community missed. And again, I'm not sure if these players were needed in order to win tournaments. In fact, they were not. But for example, in week 4, outside of the top, in this case, in week 4, with pricing being so low, ownership was spread out to about 12 or 15 players. We had more games on that slate. So outside of those, I think it was 10 to 15 possibly 15 highest owned players, we only had 2 players that popped for a score that would have helped you win a tournament. We had Marks from Houston pop for a 27-point score, and Jerome Hill scored 28 points that week. You did not need to have them in order to win. There were scores on top of that from players that were highly owned. And so that was week 4. In week 5, the top 10 owned players were definitely the only players that you needed to really roster in order to be competitive and win a tournament. Bill from Washington was 0.1% owned and put up a 31-point score. Would have been nice. I saw him on some of the leaderboards, but again, he was not necessary that week. In week 6, the top 10 owned players, again, dominated the scoring. There was a 36-pointer from Dowdle, a 32-pointer from Jacobs, 24-pointer from CMC, 26-pointer from Taylor, 34-pointer from HN. Those were the scores that you needed to have. And if you were rostering other players in that top 10 owned players, you were getting, again, decent scores, 17s, 16s. And this is the running back position because of the variability of touchdowns, right? Some of these guys get up to 30. Some of these guys get stuck around 17 points based on usage. So looking forward into, and Vidal on the Chargers was 0.4% owned and ended up putting up a 25.8 DK point score, which was helpful again because of the way that he allowed you to change the salary structure of your lineup. So looking forward to week 7, if you look at the running back position, it is not quite as robust as weeks past. A lot of the guys who we have been counting on, who have been putting up big scores, their prices have risen. Even the guys at the top who have been putting up big scores, their prices have risen. Some of the running backs that we like to play are off the slate. We do not have Detroit, who often contributes to a couple guys who are highly owned. We do not have Bijan Robinson on the main slate, who is always sort of highly owned. So in thinking of what we do this week and how bias will affect us, I still think there is that bias, right? That as far as running back goes, you need to be, I think people are catching on that you need to simply roster the chalk at running back. Whoever is the highest owned is going to put up the highest number of points. Well, that may be the case this week. The problem is that those guys are all going to cost you a little bit more money. And as pricing gets tighter around those running backs, we're not going to be able to pay up at quarterback. We're not going to be able to pay up at the flex position, and it's going to be harder to pay up, of course, at wide receiver. It's going to, again, change sort of the dynamic of the roster construction. So it's something to keep an eye on. If we are aware of this bias, the bias is that people like to play the chalky running backs and they are hitting. If we are aware of this bias, I think what that moves us to this week is to look a little bit harder for those outliers in production, right? If I can find the Vidal this week, if I can find the Bill, again, I'm always just sort of afraid to get his name wrong, which is why I don't say it, from Washington. If I can find the Marks, if I can find the Hill from Baltimore from week 4, that's going to be more important this week than it has been in past weeks. Because again, you're going to get that salary relief, and it's going to be harder for people to fit in all of these high-priced running backs. So the ownership on them is likely to be a little bit more spread out, and it's likely to be a little bit more of there's a little bit less of the running back in the flex. So again, less ownership on running back, and so that's going to be sort of something to consider as you're going forward this week. And I will be looking more for the value at running back and treating it that way. There are only 4 high-priced running backs this week. I do think the way that the running back position is going, that you will want to invest in one of those higher-priced running backs. There's just such a good chance that one of them is the back that you need to have this week. Another position that is sort of an interesting position to speculate on in DFS, at least this year, is the quarterback position. It's really tough to pinpoint who is the correct quarterback, but if we look at the position from the standpoint of how can biases creep into our decisions in the quarterback position this week, I think we can gain, again, a little bit of an edge, a little bit of a better understanding of how to play this position this week, because it is confusing to pick a quarterback. No one is standing out. Even if you put these guys into the sims and the projections, right, a lot of them are drawing ownership from the models. A lot of people are going to go to what is sort of a tried and true strategy: play the running QB, right? When in doubt, our minds want to think of something easy. Okay, I'll play the running QB, or I'll play a QB from the highest total game. So this week, if we look at the running quarterbacks, we have Jaden Daniels, we have Justin Fields, we have Caleb Williams from Chicago, we have Jackson Dart, right? All interesting plays, all guys who can add a few points with their legs. I want you to keep this in mind. I think when people are playing this, they're probably not keeping this in mind, right? Because they're making the easy decision. Can you pair that quarterback with someone? Right? For example, Jaden Daniels. Does it make sense? Will he bring another player along? Will you get two positions right on your roster if you play a Jaden Daniels, a Justin Fields, a Caleb Williams? And how easy is it to sort through those other options to land on one? With Jaden Daniels, a lot of people say you play him with Terry McLaurin. In the past, he has brought Terry McLaurin along on a lot of their bigger games together because of the downfield passing and the touchdowns. Well, it's possible he also has Deebo Samuel this week suiting up. And so Deebo Samuel is a new addition since last year. They haven't been on the field too much together. I think if you were going to play Jaden Daniels, you would have to roster him with McLaurin half the time and with Deebo half the time, or do some sort of a split. Because if you get Daniels right, you want to make sure you get the other part of the equation right. Justin Fields, Garrett Wilson is out this week. So Justin Fields now really has no one that he is comfortable throwing to, except for the tight end Taylor. So if you're playing Fields, I would encourage you to also play Taylor. Caleb Williams is another interesting one. He has been spreading out a lot of his targets more and more recently. Chicago's been off of the main slate 2 weeks in a row. They had a bye, and last week they played on Monday. So people haven't been as tuned into Caleb Williams. The last time they played him, they probably simply rostered Williams and Adunze. And while that is a good construction, that's a good duo. I think if you look at games that are shootouts, I think Caleb Williams looks to Adunze when he is scrambling, when he is in what Hilo calls the O mode. I'm on a religious retreat, guys. I can't swear. So I would play Caleb Williams and Adunze on a game that is supposed to shoot out. I'm not sure Caleb Williams has another great stacking partner on weeks like this. You may have to just spread out ownership or play a double stack and really hope that the game shoots out. Again, I don't have a lot of clarity around Caleb Williams. I just want you to make a good decision for yourself when rostering him, and consider pairing him with someone so you can get two spots right. Jackson Dart, I think we can look at that and say that is a very difficult one to get the other spot right. I may shy away from playing Jackson Dart. I'm not saying he can't put up a good score, but I'm not sure or confident that I can get two positions right. Another strategy people will go to, right, which has been working, is play the cheap QB. So this week we have Spencer Rattler, we have Cam Ward, we have Dylan Gabriel as the cheap quarterbacks. And all of those guys, again, are viable, but you got to know who to play them with. If, for example, Rattler is going to be is going to put up a tournament-worthy score, it's going to be because he hits a couple downfield bombs to Rashid Shaheed or something like that. So if playing Rattler, play him with Shaheed. Don't lose out on getting those two positions right. That's actually a really nice stack. Shaheed plus Rattler plus something on the Bears coming back. I could see that posting, a score that gets you 4 or 5x your salary. Same with Dylan Gabriel. If Cleveland is passing a lot in this game, Dylan Gabriel has a lot of cheap options to pair with him. Jerry Jeudy is all but forgotten, but more likely you'll pair him with his tight end, Fannin, and we'll talk a little bit about Judkins a little bit later. So again, when no quarterback really stands out on a slate, know that you can get multiple bets right with the quarterback. And so for the quarterback that you are rostering, go and investigate the historical fantasy points data. Look for ceiling performances. Look for guys who they have clicked with before, and try to get multiple bets right. All right, let's look ahead to this week. Let's look at a few spots where we can recognize the bias and provide some at least actionable information. As you guys know, I am more likely to lead you sort of the Socratic method in a sort of questioning your decision making, because really recognizing biases is all about improving your decision making. I can't make the decision for you by telling you what the plays are, but I will try to do a little bit more of that just to kind of see how that goes. This week, I opened up my sort of study of the slate and was instantly met with high ownership and good projectable scores for Quinton Judkins of the Cleveland Browns. Right? Gross. But he's projecting really well this week, and if you put him into early lineup building optimizers, I got almost more than 50% of Quinton Judkins in some of my first runs. So obviously he's going to be popping for other people. He's probably going to be popular. He's been talked about a lot already on the OWS Discord. And my sort of way of operating around that is to ask questions, right? Like, okay, he's projecting well, but why does he have a 50% snap share? And why are we excited to play a running back who only sees 50% of the snaps, right? That's really sort of the main issue I have with Judkins. If you look at the competition he's played, if you look at the context, okay, maybe there's a case that could be made for that. They've been trailing in every game that they have played. His competition has been tough, like the defenses that he's faced have been traditionally good at preventing running backs from scoring. But I think there's another bias that is going in here, right? And it's the pseudo-certainty bias. We have noticed that chalk running backs have been hitting over the weeks, right? That this guy with a high projection and a low price, I think he's 6K, is going to be chalky. And a lot of us are going to trust that chalk, right? I already went through how the chalk has been hitting, especially at the running back position. So we trust in the projections for RBs. We trust in the ownership percentages. And I think what's happening in a lot of people's mind is that this sort of certainty factor is dinging. I want to be certain about something on this slate. What can I be most certain in? Running back chalk at a low price, right? Because that's been profitable profitable going back the last 3 weeks. If Judkins is somehow unpopular this week, then it's likely because of his snap share, and that he doesn't, as a result, does not look like the other running back plays. He hasn't had a good game script yet. So if he is unpopular, right, the bias is, well, he's unpopular because he doesn't get a lot of snaps. He doesn't look like the rest of the running backs here. But again, we know the context around that. He has not had a game environment where they've been leading, where they've had to rely on him, right? He doesn't catch a lot of passes or get schemed passes. So they'll put in, right, another running back that can sort of handle more of the passing game. So there are definite reasons why maybe his snap share has been low, and why we can trust it to grow this week if the game environment is right. So what is actionable about this? Well, we can wait for ownership to come out. If Judkins is in fact high owned, I think we can be a little bit skeptical of that. Why? Well, there's not a lot of certainty from his past performances. And if we are projecting certainty onto someone, and there really is not a lot of certainty, we need to step back and reinvestigate that. If I'm playing Judkins and he's popular, I want to make sure that I am doing something a little different. Maybe I add on the Cleveland D to lineups that have Judkins, because he really needs the defense to perform. Maybe I, they're playing Miami, right? Miami is one of the worst defenses that is out there. Miami's D, though, has never faced an offense as poor as Cleveland, but Cleveland's offense with Judkins has not faced defense this soft. So again, that's something we are working with here. But again, if he is high owned, I may look to either pair him with something, or I may look to place something on the opposite side of this, right? If Judkins fails, how does he fail? Well, he probably fails because Miami is succeeding. So I may go that direction to create that leverage. Again, this is, I'm trying to provide some actionable information, but we don't have ownership yet. I imagine he will be high owned, and I will probably enter that with a little bit of skepticism, and look for ways to either pair him with someone to sort of take advantage of another spot on my lineup if Judkins does good, or I will try to create some leverage by realizing that, well, if Cleveland's doing bad, if Judkins is doing bad, it's because Miami is doing good, and then Gabriel's probably throwing the ball again, 45 times if they are trailing. And how can I take advantage of that? Philadelphia and Minnesota. They are playing this week. That sounds like a really interesting game. If I look at the biases involved, there is a primacy bias, right? We recognize that the Eagles are the Super Bowl champions of last year, that they had one of the best offensive lines in the league. They still have a lot of those guys, right? That they have a great a great running back, a great quarterback as well. And that we expect them to just keep chugging along like that, to keep putting up points, to keep winning, for those guys to eventually, right, do something this year in DFS. Barkley has topped out at 18.4 DK points this year. He has not topped 100 yards rushing in any game. There is a bias that eventually it will happen. We know who this team is, right? Eventually they'll get back on track. That may not happen, right? They lost their offensive coordinator, and scheme is really an important part of offensive continuity from year to year. It may be that Barkley just is playing behind a scheme that is less helpful to him breaking big plays. Remember, right? Barkley is usually succeeds when he breaks a long play. We haven't really seen that as much this year. Well, is he going to do that against Minnesota? Minnesota has a good rushing defense. It's less likely that Barkley does that he breaks out here against a good defense. While it still could happen, I guess the question is, do you want to bet on it? At 7.7K, do you want to bet on the Barkley breakout? Again, I'll go back to ownership. If he is high owned again or middle owned, that will probably have me staying away from him. If he is low owned, I can't imagine him being below 10% this week. But if he gets to below 5%, right, that's something to look at. In fact, in this game, I may be more inclined to play Justin Mason, right, at 6,200 than Barkley at 7,700. Mason has also averaged 18 points over 2 starts where he has been the starter, with a strong game and a positive game, with this being a strong positive game script when he's playing at home. I don't imagine that Justin Mason will be high owned, but I do think that this is a place where if he is the sort of lead back getting, I don't think I've checked his projected snap share this week, but if he is getting that, 75% snap share, even against the Eagles, I kind of like him in this spot over Barkley. All right, there's Carolina and the New York Jets. And this really comes down to Rico Dowdle, who has put up back-to-back 30-point DK scores. His price has obviously risen. And here's the bias. It goes like this, right? People will say about Rico Dowdle, man, I could have got him cheaper, or I did get him cheaper. And now he costs so much. I'm not sure I want to buy in now at this elevated price. Right? That's a bias that goes all the way to the way people deal with stocks, the way people deal with, right, all sorts of things. They'll take their profits from rostering him at a low price and stop investing, right? Or if they were never invested, they're not going to enter in at a higher price. But the reality is his price may keep climbing, right? Sometimes you do have to buy on the way up. So the question is this, I think, a better way of reframing this question, making a better decision. Has Rico Dowdle at 6.8K reached his correct price? Is he overpriced or is he still underpriced? Well, Chuba Hubbard's returning this week, and Dowdle likely will not get 80% of the snaps as he did last week. But maybe he still gets right 65%. There were times, I think, as he's playing 80% of the snaps, he's cramping up, right? He needs to kind of take a break. Again, I imagine if he's healthy, they let him continue. But likely in a game like this, again, against New York Jets, who aren't supposed to challenge them much on the scoreboard, it's possible they just use the two backs a little bit more in concert together. But hopefully Dowdle still gets 65% of the snaps. And in that case, I think he's best compared with Judkins here. Judkins at 6K, who is really kind of hopeful to get 65% of the snaps for his team in a positive game script. Now, the defenses are different, right? Dowdle abused the Miami run D, and that's who Judkins gets this week. And Dowdle gets the New York Jets this week. Now, the New York Jets aren't a difficult run defense, but Dowdle has shown his abilities, right? He's shown us who he is, but without the pass game work and with less efficiency due to the matchup, I can see Dowdle failing to eclipse what Judkins can do in this spot. So again, going back to my question, is Dowdle correctly priced? Well, yeah, I think he is correctly priced. Some of this is a factor of my recency bias, but in comparison with Judkins, I find that he is reasonably priced. I will own some of Rico Dowdle this week, even at that elevated 6.8K price. It is not recency bias simply to play him there. That's not an easy decision. But I want to make sure I'm not making the other easy decision of just fading him because his salary has increased. Dowdle can still score touchdowns, right? He can still get the bonus, even with his limited snap share. He might not be going off for 30 plus points, but this I think is the week where, with increased pricing and less value, that even a 25-point score from Dowdle is going to be valuable this week. All right, let's look to the most popular game on the slate, likely Dallas and Washington. And I've got a story again about bias. I met my friend once in Las Vegas as I was traveling through. He was on a business trip, right? He's works in finance with all the finance bros. And previous night, they had been at a craps table at some resort in Vegas. And so they said, all right, we're going to go back to that craps table. We were all so hot where we were winning. Let's go back to that same craps table, right? It was hitting last night. It's always going to hit. Let's bring the gang back together and let's sort of ride those good times. It's the same sort of bias of someone who goes to a roulette table in Vegas and sees that black, right, has hit 8 times in a row. And so they bet on red thinking, right, it's obviously got to be red this time. That's not sound decision-making. Probability tells us that every new roll of the roulette wheel, every new spin of roll of the dice, every new flip of the coin, right, is a new set of probability. That it's always going to be 50-50 or whatever it is for the roulette wheel. Was it like 1 in 36? That's not sound decision making, right? So Dallas has been kind of the hot craps table for the last few weeks. They have consistently produced DFS scores that have helped to win tournaments. Dallas is not always going to hit. It may be more probable even on this week, right? It's the same probability based on their stats and based on their Vegas total as any other week. So we approach it kind of in the same way. Just like this week is a unique puzzle, just like last week we had to wrestle with, do I play Dallas and Carolina? Do I roster them, even though everyone's going to be rostering them, even though that's kind of the game of the week? It's under a microscope. We have to sort of make that same decision this week. Don't say to yourself, well, I faded them last week and I missed out, right? So I'm going to fade them again and hope to get it right this week. No, go back to the drawing board, make a sound decision, involve pricing, right? Involve how many decision points on a roster you can get. What does it do to the rest of your roster if you, roster the players from that game? Again, thinking about how you can get unique within that game. Again, all of those same ways that we have treated Dallas before, we have to treat them this way this week. The reality is they may be cold this week. They may be hot. We want to position ourselves to win a tournament. Should one of those things happen, right? So either play it as if they're going to not hit, play it as if they're going to hit. But again, sound decision making, please. I hope that one was clear. Let me just reiterate. Dallas and Washington are in a similar position as Dallas and whatever team has been every week. Because you played them last week or because you didn't play them this week should not affect your decision making this week. It's a unique puzzle. Make a sound decision. All right. Now, a couple actionable pieces. Let's see. I thought those were somewhat actionable. I have one more spot this week to talk about. That's New England and Tennessee. I've been listening to JM talk a little bit about this idea that Coach Vrabel of New England, right, used to coach Tennessee and may want to get some payback against the old team that fired him. For me, that's a little bit distracting. I understand that that's good information, but for me, that's a little distracting because it leaves me with this feeling that I don't want to miss out on New England. Leaves me with this bias that is tied to a narrative with a tinge of FOMO about Drake May. Right, this New England team has already sort of been hyped up after they beat Buffalo, but really they haven't done much beyond that. Drake May has hit nearly 4x his salary when combined with another playmaker in multiple weeks. And, he's likely set up to do that again this week. But whether I think that Vrabel is going to pour it on in this matchup, or whether I think that New England is, just going to win soundly enough to produce a tourney winning score for Drake May, there is no telling whether May brings a running back with him, a tight end, which wide receiver, because he has sort of struck with Butte and struck also with Diggs. So you really got those four players and anyone else sort of new that might jump into the picture. So what do you get when you get this spot right? Well, you probably get about 4x the salary of two players, which is good, but I don't think you get a bring back from Tennessee. I don't think you're just sort of blindly putting in a bring back. New England has a good defense. Tennessee has a poor offense. So you get, about two players who occupy two spots in your lineup that get about 4x, but you're going to have to pick and choose between May and one of those other players. You may be better off just playing, mixing and matching running back, tight end, and wide receivers on New England across your lineups. Maybe that's a better way to play this. But I think that idea of is Vrabel going to run up the score is a little bit distracting, and it's probably better to look at this game from a data standpoint. What does the data say about what Drake May can do in this spot? And I think that his ceiling with another person on his team is about 4x. That's good, but I think I can do better this week in other spots. All right, so what is actionable? Let's look at Rome Odunze. I think I talked about him earlier. The last 2 weeks, he had a bye, and then he was off the main slate. He is somewhat forgotten this week. I don't think that people are going to be rostering him as much. Looking at the way that targets shook out last week on the Bears on that Monday night game, maybe that's a good decision, right? They were more spread out. But Odunze really thrived in the shootout with Detroit. So if I look at Odunze and I want to roster him, I want to roster him in games where I expect the Bears to kind of be passing, to kind of be in that mode at the end, a shootout, if you will. So I'm going to look for the next shootout style game, and I'm going to roster Rome Odunze. I could see that happening this week, but likely it'll be with Rattler and Shaheed, thinking if those two can get out to a little bit of a lead over the Bears, then Caleb Williams is going to have to pass it to come back, and he's going to probably be passing to Odunze. All right. Indianapolis. Every good Indianapolis performance this year has resulted in a strong score for Jonathan Taylor and no one else. Right? The Indianapolis has been a great team. They've been the number one offense, but they have not been great for DFS outside of Jonathan Taylor. Taylor is now overpriced, right? 8.8K on this slate is a bit much. Most of my lineups will be built around Jonathan Taylor not putting up 30 points, right? 30 points is a good score for him. It's nowhere even close to 4x, but it would be a good score. I would feel bad if I missed it. But I'm going to, when I do not roster Jonathan Taylor, I'm going to assume he is not getting me 30 points. What does that mean? Well, for this number one offense, it probably means that Daniel Jones and one of his pass catchers is getting you a good score. So when I do not play Taylor this week, I think it is actionable instead to play Jones and Pittman or Jones and Warren, knowing that if Taylor busts, that combination is going to hit for a nice score. All right, let's get out of here. I've got to get back to these boys in this retreat. I hope you guys all have a great week. I hope you are able to recognize all the biases on this slate. Please reach out to me in the Discord, ask me questions, and let's get to the top of the leaderboards.